All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Skills Live, where we're sharing knowledge for independent learning and living. Today we have Stephan Fowler, and it looks like he got a typo on his name when he logged in. But Dustin, you want to introduce him?
Absolutely. Am I unmuted? Foul it. All right.
Phone keyboards, man. What can I say? I got big fingers.
Sorry, we didn't catch that earlier.
Differentiate him from Zachary Fowler. No relation.
Nope. No, sir.
But Stephan Fowler has been a knife maker or a blacksmith since 2004, you said?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Right on. You're also a Journeyman Smith, which is a title that you have to take tests and do things for with the American Bladesmith Society. That's a pretty important thing, pretty big deal if you're not familiar with that. You're also a contestant on season 3, episode 12 of History Channel's series Forged in Fire.
Yep. And a big old white-hander.
I think it's pretty cool. That was a cool episode.
Well, the name of the episode, it was like it was a weird German word, right?
It's a Zweihander, which is German for 3 hands or 2 hands. But it's the handle on it's like that big. It's very large.
Oh, cool.
Wow. And
they don't the whole thing was about 6 feet tall.
They don't just keep those weapons as part of the show, do they? Hey.
Oh yeah, if you watch the current season, when the contestants are standing there watching them do the torture tests of the first round knives, on the wall in the background is my sword.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that's super cool. Well, yes. Among those things, Stephan's also held the title of president and vice president of the Georgia Knifemakers Guild. He is also a knife designer. Fowler Blades is your company, as well as you're making knives, designing and making knives with ferrule knives, which you can look them up, ferrule knives. Is it ferruleknives.com? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So without further ado, actually what I'm going to also do before I turn it over to you, Stephan, I'll just give kind of some foundation for people if they're jumping in here, kind of how this thing works for us. And so if you're either tuning in via Facebook or YouTube, there is the normal comments section where you can go in there and comment. We're going to be, Nick and I are going to be filtering those. We're going to be monitoring all those comments and talking with you guys. And Stephan's going to be, he can hear us, so we'll be kind of interrupting him at the most awkward times possible and then asking the appropriate questions that you guys are asking. So feel free to ask questions, make comments, because this is the opportunity to be doing this live with him. But you won't be able to obviously be chiming in like we are, but feel free to do that on the comments and talk amongst yourselves too. All right, so without further ado, this is Stephan Fowler with Blacksmithing 101.
Cool. So, blacksmithing. Cool thing about blacksmithing is it's foundationally one of the very first skills that humans kind of came up with. We figured out how to kill meat. We figured out how to cook it, and pretty soon we started wanting to make better tools and better weapons to do so. So we got into blacksmithing. The first thing you got to start with for blacksmithing is fire. So over here I've got a big forge that I've built. It's propane fired. I've got a fan on the background here that's pushing air in with the propane coming in the top, heats up steel. So your fundamentals are you've got to have steel, you got to get it hot, you got to have somewhere to hit it. So first thing I'm going to do as we're getting started here and give us something to talk about is I'm going to actually forge out a nice little bushcraft size hunting knife. And that'll kind of give us a jumping board to talk about some techniques and so forth. So first of all, you want your steel nice and hot. Now this steel right now is running around 1700 degrees. That's pretty hot, but not like welding heat. And the idea there is to get the steel into a plastic deformation phase, which means it's hot enough that when I hit it with my hammer, it'll move around. You'll see right here, I'm going to hit it a few times, and I'm going to start working a tip onto the end of my bar, okay? Now, as soon as the steel starts getting cool, I'm going to put it back in, and that's going to kind of keep us into that plastic deformation phase of the steel, which means that as I hit it, it moves. That is hands down the most fundamental, important part of blacksmithing. You want it to move when you hit it, okay? So what I'm doing as I'm putting a tip on here, is called upsetting. All right, and upsetting is a technique whereby I'm pushing the bar material back into its parent bar. You'll see when I turn the steel flat like that and forge on it flat, when you upset material, you're thickening the material behind where you're hitting with the hammer. And I want to keep that material all the same thickness as I'm going through there, okay? So there are a couple of fundamental techniques to blacksmithing that really come into play heavily with knife making. The most important being upsetting and tapering, and to some extent drawing, okay? So again, upsetting is I'm pushing material back into the original bar. Tapering is where I'm putting a point or thinning one section of a bar down and elongating. So here we are. We've got a pretty good point started on here. Now, this is a basic part of the process that happens on pretty much any knife, unless you're doing a knife that doesn't have a point on it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to upset that corner back into the bar and bring it down to a point like right down here. Now, one of the common misconceptions in blacksmithing, and we'll kind of explore this a little bit, but people will look at this shape and assume that this is the edged side. And that's actually incorrect. This will be the edged side because we're doing this all through plastic deformation. We're doing this all through the manipulation of the material. And one thing I like to really kind of talk about with students, let me turn it this way and talk for a second. One thing I like to actually go through with students is you really want to think of steel as if it's Play-Doh. And what I mean by that is if you actually think about how Play-Doh moves, when you pinch it here, it gets thinner there and it gets longer here and stuff like this. If I mash it down into a ball, how it actually moves, the material movement under power of Play-Doh. And steel moves exactly the same way. If I hit it with my hammer here, it's just like pinching it like that, and I'm going to thin it out that way, and it's going to squish out this way, and you'll get that weird divot where you pinched it, right? Well, I'm going to pinch it all the way down the bar, and that's going to thin the edge and also elongate it, which is going to change the length of one side of the bar, thus curving the bar. So that'll make a lot of sense here in about 2 heats. So.
I actually don't know where to throw this in there. Dan W said ribbon burner ?
Yes, this is a ribbon burner. That is the name of the type of burner that I'm using on the top of my forge. What that is there's a cast ceramic diffuser, flame diffuser in the top of my forge that spreads the burning of the propane out. Gives me a more even heat, and it's a lot more efficient in my propane usage. So all I've done here is I used to have a hard corner right there where my taper was, and I've taken that out and kind of blended it in. Now, that is the first thing that I've done that is actually going to influence the finished shape of my knife, is where I curve that, and how curved it is, and how long I drew out the point from there. Okay, so on this next heat, we'll get a nice good cherry heat. You'll very quickly see, I don't know if I can zoom video on this thing. No, I'm just zooming my my view of the video, not the video itself, because I'd like to get a zoom right there. But you'll see how when I start forging in my bevels, I'm just tapering one side of the bar, okay? So I'm not hitting flat on the hammer like this. I'm going to hit at an angle on the anvil like that, okay?
And Stephen, do you have a general concept of a blade shape that you're going for, or?
Yes, I do. I don't have a really good way to show it to you right now. Okay. It's going to be very similar to a Kephart, but a slightly shorter blade length. Nice. Okay. So as I forge the blade bevel, you'll see how that tip starts to rock up. Now, if you're just starting out in bladesmithing, do not try to forge a whole bevel in one heat like that. You'll just annoy yourself a lot. The real efficiency in blacksmithing and bladesmithing and so forth, anytime any occupation that involves moving material with a hammer like this, the real efficiency does not come from a bigger hammer or a stronger arm. A heavier anvil helps, I can't lie about that. A heavier anvil certainly helps, but is not required. The real efficiency comes from hitting exactly where you want, exactly how you want. Every missed blow is just a wasted bit of effort. All right. There we go. We've got a bit of blade shape. I got a bit of a curve there on the spine. We're going to fix that out. And we're just going to set the spine down on the anvil. And you'll notice my hammer blows get much lighter when I'm working on that edge, because the edge is only about a 1/16 of an inch thick right there. So I can't just go bashing on it. Okay. So that's got my blade about where I want it to be. The next thing I'm going to do is isolate off the blade. So what I'm going to do is set the blade off the edge of the anvil and hit down on the spine, which is going to create a pinch point at the end of the blade at the beginning of my handle. Right there. I don't want to go real deep with this, but I want a nice, cleanly defined spot where my blade ends and my handle begins. One of the things that I like to look at in my work to really, one of the qualitative things that I look at in my finished product that makes me smile is when I've got really clearly defined zones of the knife. I want to have a very obvious, clean transition. Here is the blade, here is the handle, here is the tip, here is the, I want all of the separate zones of the handle or the blade to be very clear to even the most casual observer. I don't like androgynous blade shapes. I got a little too tapered on my tip to really pull off a cap heart. So what happened there is I didn't leave myself enough meat at the tip. I tapered it too thin to do the actual spear point of a cap heart. I got to talking. You'll also notice at this point I'm going to try to avoid heating my blade nearly as much as I had been. Where I had been going for a yellow heat, now I'm just doing a nice orange heat. I got a nice distal taper in my spine. A distal taper is defined as a taper that originates in one position and tapers towards another position in all planes, which means I'm tapering in the blade profile, but I'm also tapering in the thickness of the spine and in every other plane of the blade. All right. A little bit of cleanup. I don't want to be too particular with my blade shape cleanup just yet, because I've still got to finish my handle, and my experience has been I can spend as much time as I want cleaning up the blade, and I'm just going to beat it up when I go to do the handle. So I want to get the blade established and clean enough that I know exactly how large it is and what angle it's sitting on and so forth. And then I want to do my handle without actually really spending a lot of time on refining the blade shape. Because I'm just going to beat it up.
Yeah.
All right. Cut off our blade. Now this is called a hot cut hardy. It's essentially a wedge that mounts into the anvil. Any tool that mounts into this square hole on the back of the anvil, come on, is called a hardy tool. And that's just there to hold hardies. All right.
Is that a hardy hole then?
That's a hardy hole. That's right. I know you're trying to be funny, but that's the accurate.
I had to assume. I didn't know why else it would be a hardy tool.
Yep. All right. Now, another good thing to note if you're doing this, I always keep a metal barrel over here with a substance called vermiculite in it. I can show it to you over here in just a second. So this is that's my trash can. This is my vermiculite bucket. And the value of that is vermiculite doesn't burn. So when you've got a hot piece of steel that you need somewhere safe to put it, you can throw it in your vermiculite bucket and you don't have to worry about it catching your shop on fire. Come on. Come on.
You only do that in an emergency where you need to kind of put it out and you have nowhere else to put it?
Yes. Yep. All right.
I think they also use vermiculite in gardening.
Yes, you buy it in the gardening section in the hardware store. So now I'm going to start shaping in my handle. I'm going to put a little bit of taper in where your fingers go. I'm going to cross over to the cross peen here and flare out slightly the back of the handle. And you use the cross peen like that to force the material to move in a specific direction. Okay, a little more heat. So going back to our conversation about Play-Doh, when I hit things with this side of the hammer, it's going to expand in all 360 directions, 360 degrees. If I hit with the cross peen here, it's still going to expand slightly this way, but it's going to mostly expand in line with your peen, right? And they make hammers with a cross peen or a straight peen or angles, whatever you want, all that kind of silliness. Again, it's one of those, just find what's comfortable to you and use it. So I want this to get longer, but not really wider. And this is going to start tapering my handle, which is a thing that I like. Some knife makers don't really care. Some really like it. It's just a personal preference. That allows me to control the weight and the balance of the overall knife so that there's not a whole lot of material, not a whole lot of mass in the back of the handle affecting the balance of the tips. My preference for the balance of a working knife, let me see if I can grab one here. So this is one of our early prototypes of a ferrule knife. And when I'm designing a working knife, I want to be able to open my hand and the knife doesn't fall out, right? So I want enough material in the handle to counterbalance the weight of the blade. Otherwise, it'll fall out. Don't do that. Don't drop your knife. All right. So now we're going to start really paying attention to some details. I want to control the shape of my handle, the taper. As a general rule, when you get into designing knives, the hard thing about designing knives, everybody goes into knife designing thinking that figuring out how to make the blade is hard, and it's really not. It's really, really not. If you think about it from a geometry perspective, anyone who's picked up knives, used knives, whether in the kitchen or in the woods or on a job site or whatever, you have a conceptual understanding of what a blade is, right? This is the edge, this is the point, this is the heel, this is, you know for yourself how a blade works. And from that, you can kind of extrapolate how you want your blade shape to be. You like it pointier, you like it less pointy, you like it more of a cleaver tip, you like a long blade or a short blade. You have your preferences. But what people don't think about is how to actually design and make a comfortable, usable working handle. And that can take a lot of trial and error to figure out, how much curve should I have in this spot? How thick should it be in that spot? And so on and so forth. So I will grace you, if you will, with some of the basics that I have found that regardless of style of handle, whether you're making a big knife or a little knife, a hunting knife or a kitchen knife or, Bowie knife, fighting knife, take your pick. Some of the basics of handle design don't really change, okay? So going back to our little example piece here, you're always going to want your index finger position. If that gets to be bigger than an inch, your handle is going to be really big. It's going to feel like a brick. Don't do that. You always want some kind of a curve here for your fingers to lock into. I shouldn't make examples with my right hand because I crushed it and it doesn't grip things properly. I'm giving you an example with a messed up hand. By the way, that was the hardest part of recovering after I destroyed my hand, was figuring out how to judge a knife handle again with fingers that don't finger.
And so was that a blacksmithing related injury?
More or less. I was getting a very large machine off of a trailer in a very stupid way. And we learned something that day. Machinery requires machinery to be moved. We don't do that anymore. All right. So that's got some good shape to it. Now, one thing I don't like that I'm seeing right here is I've got a very straight line from my handle into my blade. I like that to be a little bit of a curve. That is entirely a user's preference thing. Some people like a really straight handle into blade transition. Some people like a very deep curve. Different cultures, different knife designs, different usages, all valid. It's all a preference thing. But basics of handle design. Don't make that really big. Makes the handle feel like a brick. You've got to have some curve in there. There's not a flat plane in your hand anywhere. So what we, in knife making, what we generally call flat-sided handles is a broomstick. Broomsticks are nice if you're pushing a broom. Really inconvenient if I've got a thing that is only usable in one specific direction. Okay, so if I'm using my knife to whittle a piece of wood, I'm not going to whittle on my hammer handle. But if I'm whittling a piece of wood here, I can only cut in that specific direction. So this is only useful if I can apply pressure and control on my knife in that specific direction. So if I want to hold the blade there to apply pressure there, that's really weird and it doesn't work. So you always want to be thinking about how your handle applies to the indexing of the actual usable edge of the knife and how it lines your body up to apply power against that edge. Otherwise, what are you doing? All right, so I'm going to put a little bit of curve in here.
Hey, Stephen.
Yes.
Dustin, you can verify. It looks like the video is frozen on this end. We still have audio.
Oh. I see it frozen on my end too.
My phone went into sleep mode. Wake up.
Well, while we're in sleep mode for a second, I'll throw out two quick questions.
Yes, come on.
I don't think we've addressed these, but one is from Andrew, and it's what kind of steel are you using?
This is 1084. It is a moderately high carbon steel. Without getting too deep into the weeds of metallurgy, this tripod does not want to stabilize for me. 1084 is a hypo eutectoid steel. which means there's not enough carbon. Let's see if we can get you to do your job, tripod.
Do you have your phone in a vise?
Well, I have a vise that's set in a tripod, yes. I'm sorry, a tripod that's set in a vise, yes.
Nice.
Okay, so this is 1084 steel. It is a hypoeutectoid steel, which means that there is not enough free carbon after you harden the steel to create carbides. Carbides are a wonderful thing. We love carbides, but they require a little bit of useful discretion in their application. 1084 is the steel that I suggest most often that beginners work with, because it is it's extremely forgiving of user error, if you will. So one thing you'll notice as I've been doing this is I haven't been super specific about the heats that I'm putting the steel to. I just kind of get it hot until it glows and hit it. Okay. For 1084, that's just fine. For some steels, 52100, W2, 01, L6, some of the other higher alloy steels, you can do real damage to the quality of your finished product by not monitoring how hot you let the steel get and when you cool it off and how fast you cool it, stuff like that. Okay. So I'm using 1084 here partly because I know I'm slightly distracted, partly because it makes a good example for people who are watching who are looking to get into this. 1084 is an awesome steel for beginners. Same thing with 5160, because both of them, they're right on the line of a hyper and hypoeutectoid steel. They're very forgiving of user error. They're very low alloy contents. The heat treating process is very straightforward. You got to do something somewhat impressively stupid to truly damage your finished product if you're using one of these two steels.
So if somebody's looking to get started out in this, would you recommend they get a leaf spring at a junkyard, or is that just a bad idea if they're starting out?
On the subject of recycled steels, any steel that has been used to make a spring can be used to make a perfectly serviceable blade. No question. I agree with this statement from a scientific standpoint, 100%. The problem with using recycled steel is that you do not know the provenance of that steel. You do not know for certain if that steel is 5160 or L6, or there's a variety of steels that industries have used to make springs out of over the years. And no matter what it is, yeah, it'll make a good knife, but do you know how to make it into a good knife? If that steel is in fact 5160, then yeah, get it hot, beat it up, make it look like you want it to look, heat treat it in some kind of an oil, and you'll be fine. If you happen to get one that's 8630 and you do that same thing to it, it's not going to work. Probably not going to harden at all, or if it does harden, it's probably going to crack. So for beginners, I really, really suggest not using recycled steels on anything that you're going to actually try and call a finished knife. Okay?
All right.
Now, the usual reason that a beginner will say, well, I want to just go to the junkyard and find some old leaf springs and make some knives. Why? The usual reason is because, well, real blade steel is expensive. No, it's not. No, it's not. If you're getting 5160 or 1084 from the New Jersey Steel Baron or from Pop's Knife Supply or one of these guys, you're paying $4 to $6 a pound for your steel. So a pound of steel, I don't know if you've weighed your knives recently, a pound of steel is a really big knife. So for $5, you have enough steel. This knife, I could probably make, I could easily make 3 of those with a pound of steel, maybe 4 if I'm being really careful. Okay, wow. So for $4 or $5 worth of steel, I could make this knife 4 or 5, or 2 or 3 times, easily, no problem. Now, the usual other problem is, well, I can't find it, or I can't, you know, I can't wait for the shipping or so forth. Okay, you know, you can. I'm not saying that the recycled steels won't work. They'll do the job. I'm saying to get a high quality outcome, it's actually much more difficult to use the recycled steels than it is to buy steel that you know what it is. It comes with a heat treating regimen that tells you, all right, heat it up this hot, hold it there for this long, and you're good. Okay, you know exactly what you're getting. You've taken some of the variables out of the equation of you getting a high quality knife. Now, if using recycled steels for the sake of the recycling is important to you, man, go do it. There's going to be a learning curve. You're going to waste a lot of time on accidentally heat treating steel improperly and have to kind of figure it out. It's a lot of fun, but it is not the most reasonable path towards a high quality outcome. But again, I'm answering that question from the perspective of, at the end of the day, I want to have the best knife that I can have. Not necessarily, I want to figure out how to go find these recycled materials and make them into something new and something amazing. So if that's your paradigm, man, knock it out. That's awesome. I know a couple of guys that, you know, that's really their shtick. They really enjoy the process of figuring out recycled materials and how to repurpose things into new and usable tools. That's awesome. I got nothing against it. That's just not my, that's not the way I approach the question. All right, that's forged. Go down in there. So we're gonna turn off our propane. Where are we at time-wise? All right, told you it'd take me 25, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's gonna have to cool down a little bit. Now, off camera after we're done, I will normalize it. Generally speaking, if I was just doing my normal process, I would be normalizing right now before I go to the grinding and the cleanup phase. But that takes 15 minutes of just sitting around, heating it up and cooling it down without messing with it. And doesn't really teach you anything, but I will explain the process because it really, really matters. It is easily one of the most important quality processes to finishing with a good knife. So what we're talking about is called normalizing, where you take the steel and you heat it up to a austenitic temperature. Big old metallurgical words. There are several different phases of steel, and we got a minute to talk because that's got to cool down. There's several different phases of steel, and we have to know all of them, and we have to know exactly what temperatures the particular steel that we're using hits those different phases, and how to transfer in between those phases most efficiently. Okay, so the important ones that we have are perlite, which is room temperature, soft steel. It files nicely, it grinds and polishes nicely, but it's soft. If you try and sharpen it, your edge is just going to roll over. It's not going to hold an edge for nothing. It's, you know, it's not useful in a finished product, but it's very important in the process of making your knife. So what I'm going for right now is as much perlite in my steel as I can get. The way I do that is by heating the steel up to austenite. Austenite is that phase in which the iron molecules, the lattice of iron molecules has opened up large enough from heat, it expands, that the carbon can move around freely inside of that lattice work. Cool, that's austenite. We want austenite, it's awesome. How we get from austenite, which for this steel is about 1480 degrees, the exact process by which that goes back to room temperature will define whether I'm going to get perlite or bainite or martensite or, you know, what other phase I'm going to get. Those are the ones that we care about. We want to be able to create perlite for the purpose of filing and polishing and drilling and you know, working the steel. But then after I'm done with all of that, I want as much martensite in my finished blade as I can. Thus we do our normalizing cycles. Okay, so I've just forged this blade. I've heated it up, I've cooled it down, I've hammered on it, I've changed its shape, I've done all of these fairly abusive things to the steel. And now I want to relax that steel and get it all to one known, consistent molecular structure. And what I'm going for right now is perlite. So I'm going to heat it back up to 1480 degrees. That's our austenizing temperature. That's where the carbon can move around in the iron. And I'm going to let it cool down slowly to room temperature. And what that does is it allows all of that carbon to diffuse back out and evenly intersperse itself in the steel that we've got and relax out. When I go to harden it, however, I'm going to cool it quickly from austenite. And I'm going to use parts 50. It's a metallurgical quenchant. It's designed to do this. For this particular steel, water would work just fine. But what I'm wanting to do to harden it is heat it up to that austenite temperature and then cool it down quickly. I have about 2.5 seconds with this particular steel. 1084 and 5160, you've got 2 to 4 seconds to get from 1480 down to 800 degrees is where the martensite formation starts. And from there, it can kind of go willy. One of the reasons you stay away from some of the other fancier steels is that window shrinks down significantly. With some of the steels I use, W2, 1095, and so forth, you've got 3/4 of a second to cool it from 1480 degrees. With those steels, actually, it's 1520, but down to 800 degrees and start the martensitic transformation. So it's a little pickier. It's a little pickier in its heat treating process. Okay, so at this point, that blade is still pretty hot. I'm not going to lick it and show it to you, but I promise it is. But it's cooled enough now that I can probably dip it in some water and kind of rush this process along. Yeah, that's not too bad. If it sizzles aggressively, then I did that too early, but it's okay. All right, so now that has been cooled off a little bit, I can...
Sorry to interrupt, but is that a universal rule if it sizzles?
Hey,
and Casey's in here.
Hey, Casey. Yes. So if it sizzles, you know it's over 250 degrees. So when you put it in it and it's just a soft sizzle, you know it's 250. What I'm trying to get to when I'm normalizing is I want to get below 400 degrees. At that point, there's not enough molecular energy. There's not enough heat energy in the steel for it to matter. No phase transformation is going to happen from cooling it down like that. Let's see. I got to set up this camera over here so you can see the grinder. This will be interesting.
So your goal in the forging of the blade is to get it as close to the finished product as you can, and then you're going to do as minimal grinding as needed?
Yes. Yeah, you'll see here in a second if I can stay. My tripod is actually a bipod. One of the legs broke off, which is why it was in the vise. All right, so there's my grinder. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a quick cleanup grind on here. I actually want the flat pattern.
So what is the minimum required grinder to knock some of this stuff out at your
made, or is that a makes it?
The grinder?
Yeah.
The grinder is a KMG grinder. This is a 3 horsepower. This was the first grinder that I bought 10 years or so ago. It's awesome. I love it. Honestly, if we had 2 hours, I would show you how to do this all with files. If you've got good files and actually we'll do a little bit just so I can explain the techniques. If you've got good files, it does not take a hugely longer time to do this entirely with files. So, okay. So now my bipod is a monopod. Come on.
He's going to have to forge a camera stand real quick.
Stick with me just a little bit longer. Okay. So I've got this is a knife vise that I bought years and years ago. Does very good. Okay. And this is just a bar of aluminum that I use to support the blade in the vise. Okay. So if you're going to file like this, I'm sorry, the camera is going to shake when I do this because I go hard. One of the most important things is being able to actually really clamp your steel solidly. If it's moving at all, this is no fun. So you want to be able to very firmly clamp your steel. All right, so what we're going to do is called a draw filing technique. You want to use good quality files. I use American made Nicholson. or Black Diamond. Those are both really good files. Okay, and what you want to do is grab the handle in your left hand and pull towards you. So I'm using it just like a draw knife. Okay, so
Now, which way are the teeth on that file?
so the teeth are always going to go in that fashion.
Okay.
Right. So for draw filing, you're always going to hold the handle in your left hand. I'm sure there's some weird manufacturer that makes a backwards tooth file, but you'll know if you take a couple of strokes and it doesn't do anything that you've got a weird backwards file. If you do find one that's backwards, I want to know about it because that's crazy. I've never seen one that's backwards. All right, so
what style of file is this called to? I know that you said it's a Nicholson or Black Diamond brand, but what style is that?
This is a double cut bastard. The larger the file is, the more aggressive the tooth pattern is going to be. This is the most aggressive tooth file that I've got. I've got a larger file here, but it's a single cut bastard, and it's for a smoothing cut. So a double cut bastard means that there are teeth cut in both directions. So it's for...
If someone was going to get started on this and they wanted to do what you're about to do, and they wanted to buy one or two files, which ones would they go?
I'd buy a 10-inch Nicholson double cut bastard, and then I would buy the I would say a full round, but I really don't like anything that you would. What you want is a chainsaw file, about a 3/16 to a 5/16 round chainsaw file. These are super awesome. I use them all the time. Okay, so but we're going to do some draw filing, and like I said, if we had a couple hours to do this, I would do it all by draw filing, just to show that you don't need fancy grinders to do this. So sorry about the shaking, but you can see I've already got a good flat surface here. You know, technically, as far as making a usable knife, that's about all that I need to do.
Wow.
Now,
Okay.
I like them pretty, so I'm going to make it a lot flatter and a lot smoother and so forth. So, and for that, I'm going to be lazy. I've got a nice big grinding machine, and I'm going to use my nice big grinding machine.
Now, as far as the belts and stuff go, I'm sure there's very specific belts for grinding metal, not just going to the store and buying a little grinder.
Harbor Freight.
Yes, there are. Say again.
I think Nick's referring to just going and getting a Harbor Freight
Yeah, there's nothing that I would want to use as far as a grinder from Harbor Freight. They're underpowered, and the selection of usable belts is just terrible. Now you can get like 2x48 grinders. I don't know if Pop's Knife Supply sells any 2x48 belts, but that's who I get all my belts from. I like the belts that I use are rather expensive ceramic oxide belts, or not ceramic oxide, ceramic belts. And at some point, if you're going to do knives, you have to make a qualitative decision. Do I want to save time or do I want to save money? I can use significantly cheaper belts. The belts that I use are about $13 a piece, and I go through a belt every 2 or 3 knives. So as belts go, that's fairly expensive. But when you really break it down, it's $5 in the cost of the knife. I would rather use a better knife and not have to fight a cheap belt for an hour and use a good belt and use it for 5 minutes. That's just me. So
I think that rule applies to pretty much everything in life.
Trade-off.
Time and money.
The first thing you do is just clean up my profile with it.
We can't. Yeah, I think your mic is getting maxed out. So can't really hear you right now.
All right, so all I've done there is just hit the profile a little bit just to give me straight, clean lines to work off of. Next thing I'm going to do is come in flat on the grinder like this, and you'll see it's going to take me all of, a couple passes, and I'll have flat, clean spots on my blades. All right, so you can see there, I've got the flats, the bevels of the blade pretty well cleaned up. Next thing I'm going to do is take a magnet and just kind of clean up the handle area on both sides, and we'll be real close to done.
If anybody has any questions for Stephen, go ahead and ask him while he's working on this. We'll catch him in between grinds. I'm curious how many of you watching right now are interested in forging or already involved in it. I mean, obviously, you're all interested if you're watching, but how many of you? I know Melanie was commenting that she's been doing some.
Okay, so I've got a basic flat started on my handle. Next thing I'm going to do is come down here to this round wheel, and I'm going to grind a hollow underneath where the handle scales are going to go. And what that does is a couple of things. One, it reduces some of the weight in the handle. It's not really what I'm going for, but it does do that. It creates a place for the glue to bind to, which is really good. If you've got a really flat surface, and then when I put the handle scales on there, they're also really flat, there's nowhere for there to be glue, and therefore the glue isn't actually gluing anything. So you create a reservoir for your glue. If you've done a lot of woodworking, it's called a glue-starved joint. They're bad. But most importantly for what I'm doing right now, removing that middle in the center means that when I go back to my flat here, I'm only contacting on the edges of my handle, and it's a lot easier to get a good flat grind out that way.
Stephen, it looks like Andrew Smith is here. He says he's been teaching in bladesmithing for about 5 years. And just as a time check, looks like we got about 10 minutes left.
Yep. So you see there, I've got a hollow ground there and there. That way, when I go back to my flat here, I'm just grinding away those areas on the outside. Makes it a lot cleaner, a lot faster. So that's as far as I will go with the used belt. And I will go to a nice, sharp, fresh belt and get this finished grind. And then we'll be able to talk about finishing it.
And then you'll use that same belt there for the next knife roughing out.
Yep. go. Get this back over here somewhere where we can actually sit and talk for a moment. So that's pretty well. Hey, power hammers. There we go.
Hey,
Hey, we like power hammers. If you've never run a power hammer, they're fun. No, do not drop them on your hand. Ah. Give me 5 more minutes of not being broken, Mr. Tripod. You can do it. You can do it. All right.
Next video, forging a tripod.
Right? I could do it. I have faith. It's turning
Oh, I know you can.
So there we go. That's a that's our basic knife set up, ready to go. I still need to heat treat it. You'll notice there's still some ugly spots. I don't do my actual finished grind until after heat treat. For 2 reasons. One, if you get it too thin, you have a propensity for things to crack and warp and so forth. And 2, no matter how careful I am about the heat treat process, it's going to mess up the surface finish of the knife. Unless you have salt pots, which nobody asking me beginner questions has salt pots, I promise. Those are dangerous. So anyways, so anytime you're going to do a heat treat process, you're going to have to do some cleanup afterwards. So I just leave my cleanup to do after heat treat. So I leave myself a little bit of thickness in the knife. But yeah, I tend to leave my edge thickness about 1/10 of an inch, or even a little bit smaller. That's kind of a minimum. I've heat treated a lot of knives over the years, and that's the absolute smallest that I would feel comfortable going. As a beginner, I would suggest you leave them even a little thicker. Even not quite 1/8 of an inch, but substantial. So yeah, all I'll do after this, like I said, I'll normalize it, which is heat it up to austenite and let it cool down slowly. That's going to kind of relax the carbon around throughout the whole of the knife blank. And then I'll drill my pinholes for my handle material, and then I'll harden it, which is I'll heat it up to 1480 and cool it down quickly in the Parks 50, and then it'll be a knife. So.
And I know forging knives is what a lot of people are interested in. It's fun. It's the exciting part of it. But what else?
Yes.
What else can you do with forging materials? What are some other key items?
I mean, there's a large amount of fairly artistic blacksmithing stuff out there that all works off of the same basic principle. One of the nice things about knife making is it's a deep dive into one of the most basic principles of knife making, which is tapering. When you look at a knife, the most basic blacksmithing skill is tapering, making something thinner to one edge. Well, a knife is a taper on a taper with a taper. So if you just taper it in 3 dimensions, you've got a knife. It really is that simple, and it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. But as far as blacksmithing techniques, mostly artistic, but there's a lot of functional stuff, a lot of camp cookery type stuff, tripods, pot holders, stuff like that is really well done. Hinges, hangers, J-hooks, things like that all kind of stem from the blacksmithing tree. I mean, the basic concept of blacksmithing is I have metal that's this shape and I want it to be that shape. And I'm going to smack it until it is. Yeah. There's a really good
Casey showing off.
Yeah, that's a really good tripod setup. I think that's the one I made.
It is.
Oh, okay.
It is.
Yeah.
Many years ago.
Yes, that will cook a lot of stuff. And it's got a nice height adjusting trammel. That's called a trammel hook. To change the height of your pot from your cook fire, and super useful piece of kit. That was a thing that colonial America times, every single house would have had one of those in their big fireplace in the kitchen, because they didn't have ovens. You couldn't change the dial to I want 300 degrees or 600. Nope. How close are you to the fire? That's how hot it is. you know.
That's cool.
So, you know, nails and hooks and tools of all sorts all stem from the blacksmithing tree.
We got a question from Bruce Paris. I know he was out at Georgia Bushcraft with us one year. It says, you don't temper it after hardening?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Okay.
I temper everything after hardening. I don't think we had gotten to that point of the conversation. So after I harden it, so I want to make sure that I drill my pinholes before I harden it. Then I'll heat it up to 1480. I'll quench it in my Parks 50. It will then be hard. The problem is it's glass hard at that point. It'll be roughly 60 to 62 Rockwell. 1084, this particular steel, doesn't get screaming hard like some of the other steels do, but it's a very tough edge when you're done. But right after, go ahead.
He's wondering, do you only edge harden or do you through harden and then temper?
Excellent question. So let me finish a thought and then get into that, because there's a deep conversation to be had there. So when I first harden it, it's going to be around 62 Rockwell, but that's going to be a fairly unusable hardness for this steel. That's too brittle. Your edge will chip and so forth. So I'm going to temper it at that point by putting it into an oven 400 degrees for a couple of hours, take it out, let it cool down, put it back in. You want to do that at least twice. Now, on the edge hardening versus full hardening question, I do a lot of knives with what is called hamon. It's a Japanese heat treating technique, which leaves kind of a wavy, cool line on the edge. And it's an aesthetic thing. And as a knife maker who has studied some metallurgy, I understand completely that that is a somewhat inferior metallurgical process to do with that blade. The strongest form of knife, or strongest form of blade steel, is tempered martensite. So if you're looking for the ultimate in performance capacity, you're going to harden the entire blade and you're going to temper it back. Now, if you want that spring temper in the back of the blade, say you're making a large chopper for doing heavy landscaping work, cutting limbs, chopping wood, you're doing a lot of batoning, stuff like that, then yes, I would torch temper the spine down to like 52 Rockwell to where it's like spring tempered, but I would always start with martensite. But like I said, I also do a lot of Japanese style hardening where I've got that hamon, and you have to understand that I'm leaving the spine of that blade as perlite because it's pretty. It is in a apples to apples technical comparison, it is a weaker blade than a full hardened blade. Now, you'd have to do some pretty impressive destructive testing to actually quantify that difference. But from a simple mechanical sciences perspective, the strongest blade is a blade that has been fully hardened and tempered back tempered back from hard martensite.
Awesome. And I know you had done a class at Georgia Bushcraft. You said that you made a knife just in a campfire. Give us like a quick 30-second recap of how that worked.
That was actually a lot of fun. So
I think that's on YouTube as well, isn't it? I believe it is.
It is. That's true. So the first time I met Casey was at a blade show, and he's like, "Hey, we got this camp group that we want you to come out," and he's going to show us the rock now. That's the rock.
The rock. That's all anyone needs to get into blacksmithing is that rock right there, huh?
And that was kind of the point. We had a conversation at the blade show. He's like, "Hey, can you come out and do a little blacksmithing demo?" And I was like, "Wait, so you're a bushcrafting group, not like a skills group, but a bushcrafting group?" I was like, "Well, I'm not going to bring out my anvil and my forge and all my tools and stuff. I brought my hammer because I had crushed my hand. The handle on my hammer is made for my hand because it doesn't close. That's a fist. So I brought my hammer and one of those like inflatable mattress pumps that you pump, and I made a forge out of the campfire. So you put the pump tube into the bottom so it pumps air into the bottom of the fire, and you just sit there pumping it. And I forged in the middle of the woods with no power tools and a rock for an anvil. And
what were you using as a fuel? Just wood?
Just the wood. Just campfire wood. Yep. It works just fine. Now, you'd have a really hard time welding with it if you were trying to make Damascus or do any kind of a forge weld. But for the type of forging that we're doing, plenty hot enough. It'll get to 1500, 1600 degrees. That's fine. You know, and the point of it was there's no real necessity for fancy power tools, for, you know, grinders and propane forges and power hammers and mills and lathes, and you don't need that stuff. It's nice, it makes life a lot of fun, but you can go out in the woods and find a piece of junk steel and a big rock and make a fire, and you can do perfectly good work that way. I forget who got that knife, but
Todd,
you know,
Todd Walker got it?
yeah, yes,
I think Todd got it. Yep.
and he's shown it to me years later, and he carries it and uses it, and
That's
it's
awesome.
you know, it's rough. It's not as pretty as my, you know, my fancy Journeyman Smith presentation knives, but it's a knife. It goes out, it cuts the stuff you tell it to cut, and it does the work you tell it to do. You know?
And we went through one of our, maybe in the first skills class that we hosted was flint napping, and it was kind of that same concept that to create an edge that will work is much easier than creating the art that we're used to. And a simple flake can do pretty much anything you need to do in the woods. And here we've seen the process of forging and how you can kind of get to any stage of that with, you know, various tools and platforms. So thank you very much, Stephen. We kind of reached the end of our hour here. I don't see any other questions coming in. So tell people where they can find you if they want to reach out for more information.
Absolutely. Easiest way to get a hold of me is on Instagram. That's where I do most of my social media these days. Fowler Blades on Instagram. You know, I'm not really taking commissions. I'm kind of working on getting my Mastersmith stuff going. So making a lot of stuff for my own learning and enjoyment. But absolutely love teaching and answering any questions you guys can come up with. I'd love to hear it.
I can tell you from experience, I came in as a complete novice and worked with Stephen at a couple of the Georgia Bushcraft events. And yeah, I just blown away the amount of knowledge in terms of like the scientific metallurgy behind everything and the various steels. I just can't contain all that information in my brain. And so it's amazing. It's like working with an encyclopedia or something that you can just ask a quick question and the answer's all there and a reason behind it. And it's well thought out. It's great. I love it. Love working with you, Stephen, and appreciate you coming on the show with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Same here, Stephen. Thank you so much for coming on today. And thank you for the years and years of you coming out and hanging out with us weird bushcrafters at
Yeah,
Georgia
man.
Bushcraft, man.
I missed my dirt time. I need to get out and get dirty.
I'm telling you, well, hopefully soon enough here when the craziness ends and this fall gets here.
Yes.
You're always welcome. You always got a home here, man. And thank you again so much. Sorry I was late. It's been a crazy day for me. But,
right.
Man. So, but we really appreciate it. Tons of knowledge, man. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
All righty. Well, go follow Stephen on Instagram. Reach out to him there. Let him know you came from the Skills Series. And I think what's up next? We got not beekeeping. Jason Chapman with trapping. That's right. Yeah. And then next week we got Carly with baskets, and we're gonna get into some home brewing and beekeeping and all sorts of other skills too. So stay tuned. Join us live. Get to interact with the instructors, and we'll create this great knowledge resource database for people to find experts in fields they're interested in.
Very cool.
Right. See you guys in the next video. Bye, everybody.
See you guys. Have a great day.
Bye. Thank you, Stephen.
Bye.
Absolutely. Thank you.
See ya.